time to, did you admit Joss? Miles, okay, good. So Joss Bear is or Joss Sangalang rather, is a psychiatrist who is retired and now lives in Honolulu. And so we're getting quite a diverse group. Miles Flagg is a regular participant with me who lives in Alberta, Canada. And he's a co-host in the group. And his task will be to keep the YouTube chat civil. Because sometimes we get people that play games or say silly things, and so we can block them. And so now we are live on YouTube. And
hello, everybody. I'll just add, I sometimes I might mute people just because I hear background noise coming from them. So yeah, you'll have to unmute yourself.
Right. Okay. So we're making progress here. We have a couple of people watching on YouTube already, and usually that builds over the course of time. So I think it should be good. Okay, so here we are, and we have begun to broadcast live, and so without further ado, I'm going to introduce our guest speaker today. But first of all, I want to share with you a little bit. Steve's going to ask me about my personal experience later, but for now, I just want to share with you why we're all here on a Carl Jung Depth Psychology reading group, as opposed to anywhere else to talk about Steve's book. And so the answer is this quote from Dr. Jung, and this is in a book called C.G. Jung, Psychological Reflections, a new anthology of his writings, 1905 to 1961. And so this quote is the most apt of all. And here's what he said. For thousands of years, the mind of man has worried about the sick soul, perhaps even earlier than it did about the sick body. The propitiation of gods, the perils of the soul and its salvation, these are not yesterday's problems. Religions are psychotherapeutic systems in the truest sense of the word and on the grandest scale. They express the whole range of the psychic problem in mighty images. They are the avowal and recognition of the soul, and at the same time, the revelation of the soul's nature. From this universal foundation, no human soul is cut off. Only the individual consciousness that has lost its connection with the psychic totality remains caught in the illusion that the soul is a small, circumscribed area, a fit subject for scientific theorizing. The loss of this great relationship is the prime evil of neurosis. And that was from volume 10 of Dr. Jung's collected works, and which is called Civilization in Transition. And it's from an essay called The State of Psychotherapy Today. And so today I'm going to introduce a dear friend of mine, Rabbi Stephen Fuchs. And I have known each other for 56 years. He and I were fraternity brothers and classmates at Hamilton College. And in 2015, I was pressed by one of our other friends, Michael Berkowitz, who we will talk to on Thursday, and who will probably tell stories out of school. to read Steve's book, which I said, yeah, fine, send it over and I'll take a look. And so Mike sent it over. He got an electronic copy from Steve, and it sat on my hard drive for about 6 or 8 months, much to my embarrassment. Because when I finally did pull it up and read it, I recognized that it is literally central to everything I've been doing for the last 20 years in terms of my activity with Carl Jung. And in that regard, I started the Archetype in Action website in 2010, and the site that this is now being broadcast on, the Carl Jung Depth Psychology Reading Group, I started in 2016. And that site has over 1,000 videos on it as of now, all put there by me personally. And so when I read Steve's book in 2015, as I said, I was profoundly moved by it. And I called Steve and said, look, if you want to get people to read this, we ought to also get it in Audible form, because that's how I sell most of my books on the internet. And I said, when could you come down to Annapolis to talk with me or to do it? I'll help you do it. And he said, well, I'm going to be pretty busy the next 3 months. The only time I have is tomorrow and the next day. And I said, okay, come tomorrow. And so Steve got on an airplane from Hartford and flew down to see me. And I sat him down in front of my computer, the very one I'm talking with you now on. And I had him read his book. And then I had the pleasure over the next 2 months of editing his book, because the people who publish on audible.com are very persnickety, and so they make you take out all the mouth sounds and anything else that might be on it, like uhs or that sort of thing. And so I worked quite hard on it for a couple of months, and finally we did get it online on audible.com. And I've long wanted to have a further conversation, a public conversation with Steve about his book. And so I want to just now share with you the cover. I happen to have the cover here, and I can share it with you. Okay, so this is the cover of Steve's book, What's in It for Me? Finding Ourselves in Biblical Narratives. And so without further ado, I want to turn the floor over to Rabbi Stephen Fuchs, who is a former president of the World Union of Progressive Jews and who is a distinguished alumnus of Vanderbilt Divinity School, and have him tell us his journey to get to writing that book. So Steve, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Skip. I can't thank you enough. As you recall, the experience of creating the audiobook, the work that you did, the commitment that you had to it continues to inspire me each time I think of it. The other person that I want to thank is Susan Schumann, because I struggled mightily to get this book published, and I was really on the lip of despair. And she had been living in West Hartford at that time, and is a professional writer and had experience with this. And it was her determination and encouragement which got the book from manuscript to the book you held in your hands and showed people a few minutes ago. So I also want to thank her. Other person I really want to thank is Pastor Ursula Sieg in Northern Germany. She got the idea that this book should be translated into German, into Russian. Subsequently, one of the people that we studied with in Germany wanted to translate it into Spanish. And so I am very proud that in addition to the wonderful audio book that Skip created, yeah, I read it, but Skip created it, and I really can't say enough thanks for that, that the book is available in Russian, in German, and in Spanish, as well as I hope in English that is intelligible to everybody. In the preface, I point out that the book took 40 years to write. It doesn't mean I sat at a desk and wrote for 40 years, but it does mean the book was percolating for at least that amount of time. I was very fortunate that as a young rabbi in Columbia, Maryland, the Baltimore Board of Rabbis invited me in the mid-70s to teach the area-wide Introduction to Judaism course offered by all of the Reform and conservative synagogues in the greater Baltimore area. And at this course were three types of students. One, those who were considering conversion to Judaism. Two, those who might have been in a relationship with a Jewish person, not considering conversion, but wanted to know more. And three, Jews who felt that their own background was insufficient and that they had curiosity as an adult for deeper knowledge. And my job was to distill into 10 two-hour sessions the essence of 4,000 years of Jewish thought, Jewish history, and Jewish practice. It was an exciting but daunting task. As I prepared for the class, which I taught for a number of years, I found that there were ample resources available to explain in simple and not overly lengthy terms Jewish holy days and festivals. There were ample resources to deal with Jewish history. But in terms of Torah, the interpretation of the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible, which underlies Jewish thought, a process that has gone on for 3,000 years, there was nothing from a non-Orthodox, non-fundamentalist perspective that I found satisfactory to make as a text for people who are converting or thinking about or wanting to learn about a non-fundamentalist approach to Judaism. By non-fundamentalist, I mean people who don't accept the notion that the Torah, the first 5 books of Moses, were dictated by God to Moses on Mount Sinai. But those who accept the conventional scholarly theories that these books have several sources intertwined and were put together in the form we have them now, sometime most likely in the mid-5th pre-Christian century by a final editor who gives us the Torah, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy as we have it today. And so I began to write some essays on various topics and presented them piecemeal to the class as the subjects came up. Then in 1978, I was granted by my synagogue, Temple Isaiah in Columbia, Maryland, which I am proud to say I served as its first full-time rabbi, beginning in 1973, and we left Columbia in 1986. I had a sabbatical, and I sat down and started to write seriously the ideas that were the basis of the lessons that I was teaching at the Intro to Judaism class. We moved to Nashville in 1986, where I became the senior rabbi of Congregation Obey Shalom, the Reform synagogue in that city. And there I was given the opportunity to further my studies at Vanderbilt Divinity School. And from 1988 to 1992, one at most 2 courses at a time, I pursued and completed studies for a Doctor of Ministry degree in biblical interpretation, And it was there when I wrote my dissertation that I fleshed out and expanded in academic form the text of What's in It for Me. Subsequently, we moved to West Hartford, and each year the congregation sponsored one of the longest running interfaith activities in the country, begun in 1943 by the then rabbi of the synagogue, Abraham J. Feldman, an Institute for Christian Clergy, a day when it would give non-Jewish clergy an opportunity to learn about various aspects of Jewish thought. And that was when I began to popularize the academic dissertation that I had written at Vanderbilt and presented it as a manuscript form for the participants in these seminars. And I conducted about 9 of them over the years that they could see, read, critique, and I welcomed their suggestions. Then I served as an adjunct professor at both St. Joseph College, now St. Joseph University in West Hartford, and the Hartford Seminary. And that too gave me opportunities to refine and develop the ideas that finally came to fruition in 2014 when the book was published. So that's the story of the history of the book. And I am so grateful that people have found it of value and meaning, and I'm gratified by that.
Well, not only did I find it gratifying, but it was very helpful to me in my search. And earlier this morning, Steve asked me a little bit about my personal experience and why I was so committed to it. So I think for the benefit of Steve's congregation, I should explain that a little bit. One of my daughters also went to Hamilton College. She was in the class of 1997, and she majored in Russian, which was a bit of a surprise to me because I had her for 5 years in Tokyo, Japan. And I had traveled with her all over the world. We had gone literally in 1984, we flew around the world together. And never once in all that time did I ever mention Russia. And that's probably because this wasn't Dad's thing, so probably something like that. She went to Russia. And she actually went twice. She went once as a junior year abroad, and a second time she went on a U.S.C. fellowship after graduation, and she was in Kazan, Tatarstan. She stayed in an apartment with a Muslim woman and her daughter for a year and a half. And during that time, she was exposed to Christian missionaries. And I should mention too that her mother and I separated in 1985. And so I was not with her for most of her growing up years. And so when she came back to the Washington area, she came back to work for the American Red Cross. I had an opportunity to spend a lovely evening with her, which happened to be her 22nd birthday. And so it was February the 22nd, 1999. And so on that day, I took her to a fine Afghan restaurant in Northwest Washington, D.C. And she and I had just a lovely evening together, just the two of us talking about our experiences in Japan and around the world, etc. And at the end of the evening, much to my surprise, she says to me, well, Dad, I am sorry to say this to you, but I think you're going to hell, quote unquote. And that sort of stunned me as a counterpoint to the evening. I said to myself, who teaches a child to say something like that to a parent? But the fundamental result of that event was that I literally fell into hell at that moment. And as I was driving back across from Washington to Annapolis, where I live, I was about halfway across going 65 miles an hour. And suddenly I had a vision of Mephistopheles plopping down in the seat next to me. And it was the Mephistopheles that I had envisioned when we read Faustus in college. And so I knew that it was a psychogenic vision. And the only thing that I could think to do was to cut the Faustian bargain. So what I said was, you can have my immortal soul on my death, provided none of my daughters think that of me for the rest of my life. And he disappeared. It was an incident that took about 5 seconds, maybe, or 10 seconds at the most, more like 5. And it obviously it shocked me. I was literally furious at organized religion for producing that result. And I was trying to figure out how to interact with it. And fortunately, I had already, at that time, I had already spent 12 years studying Jungian psychology. So I, number one, knew that it was a psychogenic vision. And but it didn't solve any of my problems at that moment. But then over the years, I started to read more of Jung's work. And as I did that, I found that every time that I got in trouble in life, if I picked up any of Jung's work and started to read it, it soothed me. And so I kept reading, and lo and behold, I discovered, much to my surprise, I had not actually read much of Jung's work that was actually written by him. I read a lot of things about him, but I never read his actual work. Until about 2005, I started to read it actually. And what I discovered is that Dr. Jung was not writing about psychology per se. He was actually writing about religion and culture. And he was pointing out some of the shortcomings of the Christian church. And he was the son of a Swiss Reformed pastor. And he had 7 uncles who were Swiss Reformed pastors and a long line of Swiss Reformed pastors. And so he, from his youth, from the time he was 5 years old, knew that there was something wrong about how Calvinism, let's say, was being taught in Switzerland. And he was on sort of the same sort of quest that I was on after my experience with my daughter. And so over the years, he caused me to come back to religion. And, I now quip that in the end of the 19th century, Friedrich Nietzsche said, God is dead. And Carl Jung came along in the next generation and showed that not only is God alive, but where he lives and how he goes about doing the business of the Godhead. And as a result of that, I ultimately did a public talk, which is on this YouTube channel, last October called Finding the Living God. And you can take a look at that if you like. But in the course of that evolution then is why when I ran into Steve's book, it was right up the alley of what I needed to come back and understand what Dr. Jung meant and what he was writing about and talking about, not only about Christianity, but also about Judaism and actually all of the world's religions. And he went back far into antiquity with his researches and his writing, and understanding the human mind and how it had developed certain concepts and ideas. And the building behind me in this image is his home at Bollingen. And this is a building that Dr. Jung built with his bare hands. And he never plumbed it and he never electrified it. He wanted it to be as a building would be during medieval times. And so he often said that the only thing a medieval person would find out of place in his home was the matches. And his purpose of being there, and he often went to Bollingen, it wasn't his main home, which was in Küsnacht outside of Zurich, but at Bollingen, when he went there, he put himself in a frame of mind of a medieval person, which was before the scientific method spoiled anybody's brain. Okay. And so he wanted to understand how medieval people thought and where they got their ideas. And so much of his work is related to that to some extent, although it's all very religious in its context. I just want to introduce you to Tim Holmes. Tim is my partner in this venture, and Tim is a world-renowned artist. He's the first American artist to have a solo exhibition at the Hermitage in St. Petersburg. And you can find his website at timholmesstudio.com. And you'll find some very amazing images on that site if you go look at it, timholmesstudio.com. But Tim, I wonder if you want to just talk about the origin of this group, and then we'll leave it open for comments so others can talk with Steve while he's here.
Sure. I've been aware for quite some time that we live in a culture that is pretty devoid of rituals, and it's unfortunate that at a time when we are all of us around the world are dealing with this virus, that we don't have some kind of a community-centered ritual that allows us to unload some of the negative feelings we have, some of the fear, the feelings of loneliness and disconnection. A lot of people are losing their jobs, their connection with their work community, and it's always seemed to me that we get a lot of our strength from the community in which we participate. I don't know if there's a name for that, but you know, there's a threshold of about 150 people that forms any person's real connection with the rest of humanity, regardless of our community size. And so myself, I live in a fairly small city or a big town, about 30, 40,000 people. And even so, my community is very, very small and mostly centers around my church community and a few friends here and there. But regardless of where we live, it seems as though we need some kind of a way to unload or at least address our negative feelings that arise in this kind of a situation. And so this group was really born out of that need to connect with other people, even strangers who are scattered around the world dealing with very much the same issues. And for me, it's been very helpful to be able to talk to people in different parts of the world and realize that the same troubles that I'm dealing with are shared around the world. I'm in Montana, which is the northwestern part of the US. And it's a fairly rural part of the world. And as I say, I'm in the middle of actually in the capital city, just about 3 blocks from the Capitol building. But even so, I hardly ever get to see anybody. I live in this wonderful studio, my art studio, which is a wonderful little kind of a hermitage for myself. But I very much miss other people. And one of the things that is most helpful for me is just listening to other people's stories and being able to share their difficulties. So that's one of the impetuses behind setting this group together. And I see a lot of new people here. I'm really glad you're here, and I hope you come back again. So thanks for sharing.
Okay, so let's open the conversation to others and address our questions to Steve or whoever else you may wish to talk to here. So I'm delighted to see that Steve has a very loyal congregation that will show up when he says he's going to be online. I want to recognize Brother Francis Downing, who's interacted with me over a couple of years now, but I've never actually seen in the flesh. And so I'm delighted to see you here, Brother Francis.
And you, and to see you, and everyone.
And tell us where you live in the world.
I'm in a little seaside town called Hunstanton. It's in England. Not quite sure how to tell you. It's like in the middle of England, across a bit east, in the Wash it's called, just off the Wash. So I'm in England, UK.
Okay, thank you so much. Did you have any comments here? I don't know if you came in time to hear.
Oh, I came in just as you said something about, I think you just mentioned a bad experience. Okay. With church, and you did mention Calvinism.
Yes,
which is something as it's very recently I've discovered something that really sort of, well, it's murder to the heart. I'm very slow picking up on all this, to be honest. I've only just realized some of the sources of very damaging theology.
Well, a lot of theology has been damaging over the years. You know, I'm descended from the Dutch, and our history is that during the 80 Years' War, the Spanish Catholics would come to Holland every summer to beat the Dutch back into Catholicism. And in the fall, the Dutch, after the harvest, the Dutch would flood their country, and the Spanish would go home to sunny Spain for the winter. And that finally ended with the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648. But my ancestors were basically Dutch refugees who were trying to escape a religious war. And they came, and my first European American ancestor and his wife and 3 sons were 5 of the first 150 settlers of Manhattan Island. And they came to the New World to escape that religious war. So that's, and of course they were Calvinists, and so and probably didn't know any better at the time. And I wouldn't say that I'm a hard and fast Calvinist or ever was, but because I was raised in the Navy, which has an ecumenical service for the Protestant congregation. And, so, there's a lot of sore rubs among religious traditions, of course. And Khushbu is here representing Hinduism, and or I don't know if representing it, but certainly she is Hindu. And in India, there are obviously terrible fights between the Muslims and the Hindus. And so the question becomes, how do we get the world's religions to stop turning away from one another? And I know Steve has been part of this for many years. Stop turning away from one another and rather turn back toward one another and find what it is that's common and what it is that others have learned that.
Can I just say,
we have an interesting issue here because nobody doubts that a lot of atrocious things have been perpetrated in the name of religion. And if I were to identify the problem, it is religious absolutism. The idea that my religion is right and therefore everybody else's is wrong. And the damage that that has caused is really beyond description. One of the reasons I asked person I did, Heidi Hatzel, Professor Heidi Hatzel, then president of the Hartford Seminary, to write the foreword to my book, among her other sterling credentials, is she's not Jewish. And she was able to identify in her foreword that this book is not for Jews only. It's not even for people who only believe in God. Because to me, when people claim that they understand how God works and why God does what God does, I become very, very skeptical. By definition, for me, God is beyond our understanding. As I like to say, there's a reason we come to worship God and don't expect God to worship us. So when people say to me, why does God do this? Or why does God, that's way beyond my pay grade. But I think that the book and Torah have made a discovery that has had profound influence on all of human thought. And specifically, I can reference when you mentioned the connections with Dr. Jung. Now, to be truthful, and I know this isn't a surprise to you, Skip, I can tell you all I know about Jung in one sentence. He was born in 1875. He died in 1961. His middle name was Gustav. I'm big on middle names. I know that your middle name, Skip, is Lip, and I just have a way of remembering those things. But the Torah gave us an insight.
Rabbi, can I say something? Do you mind if I just butt in? We're speaking just a little while ago about Calvin. I'm sorry, if you want to carry on speaking, I'll stop.
Yes, please. That the God that Torah represents or presents to us is fundamentally different than all of the conceptions of God that had ever emerged before. In the pagan world, these gods that people worshiped were thought to be forces that had power. And the only purpose of religion was to appease these gods, i.e. to convince them by offerings, a system which always escalated to human sacrifice, that they wouldn't use their power to hurt us, or maybe that they might use their power to help us. That's it. Along comes the Torah, and it is way beyond me to explain how the idea emerged or what its origin actually is, but they present to us an idea that is totally revolutionary in human thought. That there is one single, good, caring God with an agenda. And that agenda is that we human beings, the ones who have the most power to influence what happens on this planet, we're not as strong as the tiger. We don't swim like the dolphins, but we can have an impact on the environment far greater than any other creature. And therefore, we are charged with responsibility to make on this planet a just, caring, and compassionate society. And all that we do in Jewish practice is designed to reinforce and inspire us to work toward that end. Now, one of the questions that I'm always asked is, why do we have to have all these religions? Why don't we just have one? And that is the essential question. Because my question, we Jews answer questions with questions, by the way, is whose religion is it going to be? Will it be yours, where the life, death on the cross, resurrection, and ascension to heaven is the central underlying thrust of everything we do? Will it be Skip's, where Carl Jung's philosophies and writings and teachings underscore his efforts to make the world a better place? Or will it be mine, where neither Jesus nor Jung plays a very essential part at all? I have concluded that what we have to do is treasure our particular religious perspective. Be willing to share it with people who are interested, but never, ever feel compelled to force it down anyone's throat. Let its value be manifest in the things that we do and the way we go about trying to make the world a better place. So this idea, a revolutionary idea of deity, continues to influence Christianity, Islam, and Carl Jung, and so many other ways of looking at the world. And this is something that is, I think, an important idea that all of us can embrace. And when it comes to the common ground, the turning inward, if you will, and then letting what we learn from our inward introspection be a gift to everybody else, it's the idea that we're all on this little planet together. And that we all have responsibility for what happens here. And that each of us in our own way, without judging the beliefs of another, need to do what we can to make it the best place it can possibly become. Thank you for your patience.
Rabbi, I wonder if I could ask, you said that you don't know much about where the Torah came from. I'm very interested in how it developed out of Zoroastrianism and out of other evolutionary action when we moved out of our caves and hunter-gatherers into becoming axial people, agrarian people. And I feel that the whole message of the deity came about, one, because people could see that by cooperating with nature, rather than fighting with nature all the time, there could be a symbiotic process. And two, because people could see that there was no longer any need really for the sacrifice to appease the gods. There was a seasonal thing that happened all the time. And my other question to do with that, not only where did the beauty of the Torah and other religions such as Zoroastrian come from, where was the source, where is it going? Where is the evolution taking us now? Now we are computer people, or whatever we call ourselves now, the human race. What's the theology of God going to look like now, and where it's going?
Wonderful questions. I would say this: the unchanging reality, no matter how computer literate we become, no matter how many atoms we split, no matter what kind of delicate surgeries we are capable of performing that were unheard of 20, 30, 50, 100 years ago, is that God wants us to use our talents to make the world better. And I think that anything that moves in that direction, anything that is motivated by that lofty goal, is a positive development, as long as we are not hurting somebody else. My freedom ends where your space begins. And I think that that is very, very important to remember, this idea that we have to respect and learn from one another. You know, back in 1927 in Baltimore, a rabbi, a priest, and a minister formed something called the Tolerance Trio, which was revolutionary in its time. The idea that three clergy of different faiths would cooperate and bring a message of unity and commonality was unheard of. Well, we've moved, I believe, in an evolutionary way, and I hope we have, beyond tolerance. We need to embrace, respect, and affirm differences. One of my favorite stories in the Torah, and again, my thrust in this book, is that these stories, the truth of these stories has nothing, zero, to do with history or science. I don't know if there was a Garden of Eden. I imagine there was a deluge because of all of the writings that's been done about it in various corners of the world, but I wasn't there. And what I want to gather is, what do I learn? What does the story teach me that helps me today and furthers this evolutionary goal of making the world a better place? So when people say, well, how come we only have all these different religions? I say, well, once upon a time, in Genesis chapter 11, we read about everybody thinking alike, everybody talking alike, everybody working together. And that working together led to what Scripture regards as a rebellion against God, an attempt to usurp God. And so God, in response, scattered us. In other words, not just created different languages, but created diversity. And if God created diversity, it can't be bad. If God created people whose beliefs are 180 degrees different than mine, I'm not going to question that. I think that is something to embrace. And so what I can learn from my Christian friends, my Muslim friends, my Hindu friends, my Buddhist friends, people who are atheists and become very, very good people without even thinking about God. All of that to me is positive. And I hope and I pray that our evolutionary direction is to continue to look for and embrace things that are helpful to us in whatever religion. One of the prayers in our old prayer book that we didn't put the prayer away, we put the prayer book away. We see and welcome all truth, whether shining through the annals of ancient revelation or coming to us through the seers of our own time. There is so much that we can learn and so much that we can use, but the underlying principle is unchanging to me. And again, that principle, God wants us to use our talents to make a more just, caring, compassionate society on this planet.
Brother Downing, would you like to come in now? And
I can only agree. I can only agree with what Rabbi is saying.
okay, well, I do too.
I totally agree. The other thing I wanted to say, I want to just go, sorry, Skip, I just wanted to go back, just to say a sentence, but don't take it back to where I want to go, just hear this. You mentioned Calvinism. Well, I know someone who, I think they were pretty well Calvinist. Now, I don't know what all that means to you, Skip, but what it meant to him was that he said people are created, they're not created, sorry, they're rotten to the core. But, Rabbi, the Torah says we were created good. Yes, we were, and yes, we are. That's all I want to say. And that's what contributes to your vision, which is quite true. There's a person called Richard Roy you need to look at if you haven't done already, a Franciscan friar, totally in agreement with you, and I'm totally in agreement too. That's all I want to say.
Thank you. I believe that inherent in humanity is the impulse to do good and the impulse to do evil.
Yeah.
In our home in Connecticut, my wife had a graphic up in our bedroom that spoke of a Cherokee legend where a grandfather is telling his young grandson, you know, my child, there are two wolves inside each person. One is kind and caring and compassionate and loving, and one is greedy and evil and selfish and mean. And these two wolves fight with each other all the time. And the wide-eyed grandson says, Grandpa, which one wins? And the answer is the one you feed. So yes,
I've read that somewhere. Lovely, thank you.
Human beings have tremendous capacity to do terrible things and wonderful things.
Yeah.
And we know that anger, jealousy, greed, we feel all of these things. At least I do. Maybe I'm not speaking for anybody else, but I know that these impulses rise up in me. And for me, what John Steinbeck called the symbol story of the human soul, because it is each of our stories, is the story of Cain and Abel. You may remember he considered his greatest work not Grapes of Wrath, but East of Eden. He won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1962. And what is East of Eden? It is an 800-page, I will use the term midrash. Midrash is a term for Jewish folklore and interpretive text. An 800-page expansion of the 16-sentence story in Genesis, the story of Cain and Abel. And what is that story? Two brothers. They both make offerings to God. God accepts one, rejects the other. Cain, whose offering is rejected, is angry and jealous. And people say, well, why would God accept one and not the other? And of course, our rabbis, who were terribly uncomfortable with the idea that God can be capricious, choose to interpret the text that, oh yes, Cain brought just some ordinary stuff, but Abel, he brought the very best he possibly could. Therefore, it's understandable why God would accept Abel's offering and not Cain's. The problem with that is I don't think the rabbis understood what the text is actually saying, because the initiative for bringing the offering was Cain, and the connecting word between the two offerings is also. So my scenario is very clear. They both brought the very best that they could, but indeed one was accepted and one was rejected. And what is that going to teach me? Torah doesn't always teach about the way the world should be, but about the way the world is. And the way the world is each and every one of us in these boxes has made offerings that are not accepted. Studied for a test, got a poor grade. wanted to be the star of the team, ended up on the far end of the bench, fell in love with somebody who didn't care about us, applied for a job which we knew we should get that went to somebody else who we knew was less qualified. I've said that before the internet allows you to publish anything you want, you had to submit things to respectable publications. And while I had a number of things that were accepted, I had just as many, if not more, where I got a little postcard that said, oh, we're sorry, due to the volume of submissions that we received, we cannot publish your essay. And then I look at the next month's issue of that periodical, and I say to myself, they published that, and my brilliant essay, which should have gone right to the Pulitzer Prize Committee, was rejected? Are you kidding me? I know about anger and I know about jealousy. And we all do, because it's a natural impulse. And the question God asks is, what are you going to do about it? How are you going to handle it? And God takes time from what we assume, I would say, is a very busy divine schedule to go one-on-one with Cain and say, look, I understand. I know how you feel. And if you just hang in there and do the best you can, that's success. I don't know how many times I tried to say that to my 3 children as they made their way through the vicissitudes of toddlerhood, adolescence, and young adulthood. Hang in there, do the best you can. That's God's advice to Cain, that's God's advice to us. But what happens even after God takes time to go one-on-one with Cain? He kills his brother anyway. How horrible. What does that teach me? It teaches me that we have free will and that we can choose to do either what is good or what is evil. Again, which wolf do you feed? So when people say to me, how could a good God allow the Holocaust? I say to myself, the answer is in the 3rd story of the 1st book of the Torah, in the story of Cain and Abel. God doesn't make us do anything. Now, I will tell you, I wish sometimes God would, but then again, I'm not God. But we do see God as the force, at least I see God as the force which encourages us to, again, referring to the Cherokee legend, feed the good wolf and do what you can to make the world better. And when
it's fascinating that
to do what's evil, what's venal, what is greedy and selfish to the expense of others, I believe God weeps. But free will is what makes life meaningful.
Steve,
and without it, we would be just puppets. And
Steve, it's fascinating that you mentioned that story because the Cherokee story, because I used it in my book that I wrote in 2014, and then Jean Raffa, who wrote the foreword to my book, also repeated it in her foreword. And then when I gave my talk, Finding the Living God, I repeated it also at that time. Some of you may not know that about 5 years ago, I created a YouTube group, which is called The Rabbi, the Revolutionary, the Writer, the Dreamer, the Writer, and the Marine Walk into a Bar. And Steve is the rabbi, and the revolutionary is Mike Berkowitz, who you'll hear from on Thursday. My group has already heard from Jean Raffa, who's the writer, and I'm sorry, she's the dreamer. I'm sorry, rabbi, revolutionary, writer, dreamer, Marine, okay? And so Jean Raffa is the writer, or the dreamer, and the writer is Mel Tamadikan, who is on retreat right now. But in any case, it's just interesting that you would mention.
You're the Marine, Skip.
Yeah, I'm the Marine. But so anyway, Steve, I wanted to ask you, I know that there have been many cases over the last 40 or 50 years where theologians of various flavors have gotten together in their local community and had ecumenical meetings. But I wonder how much of that has permeated out into congregations and that sort of thing. You know, because I think that that's where it needs to be. It doesn't need to be in the silo of people who are theologians. It seems to me it needs to be in the congregations themselves. And I wonder if you have any thoughts about that.
Sure. I think one of the things that I feel very proud of is that I've never turned down an invitation to speak gratis to any religious group that wants to dialogue with me about any subject that they have on their minds over the last 45 years.
Yeah, why don't you talk a little bit about what you have done in Germany? I'd really appreciate you mentioning.
Well, let me get to that in a minute, but
okay.
I think that I was fortunate in Columbia to be part of a congregation that lived in this new city conceived by James Rouse as an interfaith center where we shared space. And that brought us into proximity all the time and led to what I would call necessary sharing. We were living together under the same roof. And while it's hard to articulate because of that A, B, C, D, E, and F happened, it is clear to me that we are interconnected. In Sanibel, we live in the Sanibel Congregational UCC, and we share their space, and we share more than space. We teach, the pastor and I teach joint classes every year. Last year, we took a group of about equal numbers of each of our respective faiths on a trip to Israel. And we also, of course, exchange pulpits. I think these are things that should be done on a micro level, a local level. I am less interested in grandiose programs sent to us from the National Organization of Reform Judaism or any church telling us what we should be doing, and exploring the relationships that can exist based on the idiosyncratic personalities and proclivities of the people involved. So it's been a very, very important part of my existence. And that is what led us to go to Germany, which initially was not so easy because both Vicky's parents and my father grew up in Germany and left Germany just in time to not be caught in the jaws of Hitler's horror. And so in going back to Germany, we are saying to people, in effect, we can't change the past. Nothing any of us can do in any way, shape, size, or form can undo what has happened. But there is a future out there. There is that evolutionary future to which we referred earlier that's in our hands and which is very, very, very important to us and is crucial. So we tell our stories, we tell our parents' stories, and we make it very clear to the high school students where we speak that they are not responsible. Now, we know because sometimes we are told and sometimes we intuit that a lot of these teenagers have grandparents who were part of the problem, if you will. And we make it clear that we are not there to make them feel guilty. We are there to see if these lessons that this horrible period in history can teach us, if we choose to listen to them, are there for us. One of the chilling experiences that I had was when I was asked to be the guest preacher in a Lutheran church in the village of Kaltenkirchen, whose minister in the Nazi period left the church and became a Nazi Oberkommando. This man was brought to trial at Nuremberg, condemned for the atrocity deaths of 2,000 to 3,000 Jews, sentenced to die. The church got his sentence commuted, and then the church succeeded in getting him released from prison, and his life sentence was vacated. And this church lives with the guilt that this was the man they trusted to be their spiritual guide. And so in 2017 or whatever it was, I'm brought in 2016, I'm invited to speak to this congregation. They've never seen a rabbi. It's not an area where Jews live. And what am I going to say to them? The church is one that I call the Church of the Broken Cross, because in their social hall, one of the members, to call to mind what this horrible man did to their whole psyche as their pastor, she painted a cross lifted up out of the ground, lying atilt on its side. And after the service, we had a question and answer, and she talked about it, and we spoke about it. And as I spoke in the service, I could see tears in people's eyes, because the message was essentially the same one Vicki and I teach in the schools. We cannot undo the past, but the future is ours to shape. We all have regrets in life. At least everybody I know has regrets in life. And the question is, are we going to use these as constructive lessons to help us make whatever time we have left more productive, more positive, more kind, more caring, more compassionate? Or are we going to let the regrets of our life sour us on ever doing anything to make the future better? And I think that's an important question that we have to ask ourselves. And I think it's an important question that various religions in our various ways can frame. Let me be clear. I have no interest in everybody abandoning their particularity. I don't believe that turning outward means I forget that my heritage is grounded in 4,000 years of Jewish tradition, which I've made the central subject of my life. And I don't ask a Christian, a Muslim, a Hindu, or an atheist to abandon the connection to the influences that have shaped her or his existence. I believe that we need to use those connections to share with one another, educate one another, learn from one another, and grow together.
So are there other folks that want to ask questions? I don't want to hog the mic here, but Vicki, you want to say something? Wait a minute, we have to unmute you.
Of my screen.
What will you say?
I was just getting rid of something that appeared on top of my screen, but it looked like I had my hand up.
Oh, I see.
I'm enjoying this very much. I like the questions and the answers and the interplay, and I'm fascinated by the different religions and locations that are represented here. This is really wonderful. It's a wonderful thing that you've organized.
Yeah,
Truly is.
Thank you. Okay, well, while we're waiting for someone, okay, go ahead, Janet. Let me unmute you so that we can hear you. There you go.
Yeah, I would just like to put in a big plug for Steve's book and emphasize that, you know, he made it quite clear that it's for anyone of any religion or not,
Sure.
and that the accuracy of these stories in the Torah, or the importance, is not whether they're accurate verbatim or not, but the lesson learned from them.
Yeah, I have to read from the first few paragraphs of chapter 1, because this is where Steve got me right away, and why I couldn't put this book down until I got to the end, and then I called him up and said, Steve, you got to come down here tomorrow. And we're going to record this. So in chapter 1, which is the creation story, Steve says the following right at the beginning. The creation story in Genesis is one of the most misunderstood stories in all of literature. No narrative better illustrates the dichotomy between those who interpret the Bible literally and those who dismiss it as quaint folklore. Clearly, this story is not scientific. Come on, a big light to rule the day and a little light to rule the night, a heavenly firmament with water above and floodgates that open to cause a deluge. No, the Genesis story is not good science. It's not bad science. It's not science at all. It is an exquisitely instructive religious poem. And I just loved the way Stephen put that in his book. And it goes on from there and is quite meaningful in many ways. But that was how it began. And he had me right from the get-go.
One of the questions that I'm asked when you talk about the creation story is about Shabbat, the Sabbath. And I think it is very important to understand that the idea of Shabbat is written right into the fabric of that very first story. Whoever did the chapters and verses that come into our King James version of the Bible missed the fact that when chapter 1, according to their calculation, ends, the story isn't finished. And that the idea of Shabbat, the seventh day, is a crucial part of the creation story. And indeed, when Thomas Cahill, an Irish Catholic writer, in his series on different people's contributions to the betterment of the world, in his book, the 1999, I think it was 1999, The Gifts of the Jews, Cahill wrote Shabbat. The idea that time is not just an unending repetition of one day after the next, but that the Jewish idea of Shabbat in the creation story in Genesis, which again, as Janet pointed out, is nothing to do with science, nothing, in my opinion, to do with history, but is a religious poem. One of its teachings is which there is two types of time. There is ordinary time, which we absolutely need to go to school, to learn, to work, to create, to develop, to earn a living. But there is also sacred time, time to step back and ask ourselves, what's the point? Why do we do all of this? What am I trying to accomplish? And that is what Shabbat is all about. And in particular, when you look at the bulk of Jewish history, a history not marked by the prosperity, the comfort that perhaps we Jews in the United States enjoy today for the most part, but was marked by poverty and fear and persecution and never knowing what was going to happen tomorrow, the Shabbat became an island in time where the poorest peddler became a king, where a humble hovel of a home was turned into a palace, where candles were lit to symbolically welcome God's presence into our lives. Why candles? Perhaps the greatest discovery God permitted us to make in the development of science was fire. Now, we all know that fire is absolutely necessary for all scientific progress. But we also know that fire, if untended or allowed to burn out of control, can be so terribly destructive. And so we revere fire. We don't worship fire, but we revere it. We hold it in awe as a symbol of what God allows us to do and of our potential to once again listen to and feed that good wealth that is inside of us. And yes, we keep coming back to this Cherokee legend because it puts it so succinctly. I don't imagine the Cherokees studied Torah. I don't imagine they had the benefit of the Midrashic teachings in the academies of Pumbeditha and Sura in ancient Babylon. They were capable of apprehending the truth as profound as any that human beings ever conceived. And I think that our goal is to seek those gifts that come to us from all religious traditions. My religion is mine. I'm proud of it. I don't ever want to be anything else. But that doesn't mean in any objective way, mine is better than yours, or nobody's.
Steve, I want to mention to you a book. This is called Liberating the Heart. It's by Lawrence Yaffe. Because of my thingy, I can't get the right distance. Let me just stop my virtual background for a moment so I can show you. Okay, so this is the book. It's called Liberating the Heart by Dr. Lawrence Yaffe. And it's called, the subtitle is Spirituality and Jungian Psychology. And just as an aside, Dr. Yaffe died in 2003, regrettably, but he was the son of Agnella Yaffe, who actually was the person who pulled Jung's memoir, which is called Memories, Dreams, Reflections. He pulled it together. And so in chapter 9 of his book, he called it this, and I just want to read the first passage to you because I think you might appreciate it based on what you were saying about the Sabbath. So chapter 9 is entitled The Sabbath, God's Only Daughter. And then it has a couple of quotes before the beginning. One of them is busy, 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 which is a popular saying. And then another quote from Georgia O'Keeffe, which is, nobody has time anymore to look at a flower. And then here's what he said. The Jew's great contribution, quote unquote. That's the secondary title of the chapter. If, as I once read in a statistic book of all places, the world of reality is a world of limitations, the inner world would be, by contrast, a world of absolutes. We need absolutes to live fully. For instance, we need to know that in a certain sense, each one of us is of infinite value. The Israelites were the first to worship a God who loved them to excess. To God, they were special, a holy people that he bound to himself in a covenant. Jung writes, quote, Yahweh compelled a personal relationship between himself and man, who could not help but feel personally called by him. That was the essential difference between Yahweh and the all-ruling Father, Zeus, who in a benevolent and somewhat detached manner allowed the economy of the universe to roll along on its accustomed courses and punished only those who were disorderly. He did not moralize, but ruled purely instinctively. He did not demand anything more from human beings than the sacrifice due to him. He did not want to do anything with human beings because he had no plans for them. Father Zeus is certainly a figure, but not a personality. Yahweh, on the other hand, was interested in man. Human beings were a matter of first-rate importance to him. He needed them as they needed him, urgently and personally. Against mankind as a whole, Zeus had no objections. But then they did not interest him at all that much. Yahweh, however, could get inordinately excited about man as a species and men as individuals if they did not behave as he desired or expected, unquote. And that quote was from Answer to Job, paragraph 568. But anyway, then he says, interpreted psychologically, bondage to God in a covenant suggests that in order to keep one's integrity, one must regularly turn one's attention inward toward God. This is why keeping the Sabbath day as holy is one of the 10 commandments. It means the same as turning one's energies inward, away from worldly concerns, a sacrifice because it produces no tangible result. The world, on the other hand, would claim all of our energies. The list of important things to do in the world is endless, quote unquote. So that I recommend this book to you if you have a chance. It may be out of print, but I think that it's available on Amazon in used books. It's called Liberating the Heart, Spirituality and Jungian Psychology.
Janet has a point to make.
Yeah, go ahead, Janet. Let's unmute you first.
Great. One last comment. I find that in this time of the pandemic, the coronavirus, I'm looking forward to Shabbat even more than usual for the respite and comfort it offers.
Good point.
Yeah,
Can I bring something back to something Rabbi Stephen was saying a little while ago? Wind back.
a little louder, please.
Oh, sorry, I'll come a bit closer. Something Rabbi Stephen was saying a little bit further back. He mentioned like 2 wolves, right? Feed one or feed the other.
I only know about 2, but go ahead.
Yeah. Listen to this one. Not another wolf, right? Well, perhaps it is a wolf. I've had these ideas come together, 3 ideas. One of them is that we do have free will. We are each here to do good in this world. We all can do good in this world. And I've lost the other 2, just a second. So I've got to think about the other.
That's okay, you got the important ones.
I've lost it. I've lost the second one. In York was feeding the one that would do bad, wasn't it? Feeding the one that would do bad. But yeah, my point wasn't that. Is that God is working. He's working even, we do not know how, you know, we have no idea, like you said, Rabbi, we do not know really what God is really at all. But God is doing good and he's bringing good out of all. We have free will. God is doing good out of, behind the scenes, bringing good out of all. It's all unfolding beautifully. But we have a third thing, and this is when people abandon what they think life is about to a thing called fate. And my connection to that, I feel really strongly about this, is it's abandoning to human systems that are just mindless, make decisions on the behalf of human beings. I mean, in my country, I know it's happening in America, there's been decisions made by governments that have really done bad things to people who are disabled, mentally ill, disadvantaged, poor, underprivileged. Now, evil carries on. This evil, that there is evil, it carries on while we just abandon ourselves to something called fate. There isn't fate, except if it's this evil influence, which is saying things are the way they are. You accept them. No, you don't. You don't accept the way things are. We have free will to do good with our lives. God is doing good in the background. bringing good, but there's evil going on as well. And people, you know, I just coming to mind now, just flipping back to Nazi Germany. There's this fixed idea that there's these level of people up here that are really perfect, and then there's this lower level, and let's decide who they are. They're disabled people, they're homosexual. I'm not saying I agree with this. I totally do not. We're all on the same level. But there's this lower level, disabled, homosexual, perhaps you'll remember others. Rubbish. That's the evil influence, and we abandon to fate if we just say, yeah, that's the way it is. We abandon to evil if we just say, yeah, that's happening. Oh, it's set up that way. The laws are right in our countries. The policies of government are right.
Thank you. I noticed that what you say is of course true. Our sages had a saying that one good deed begets another, one evil deed begets another. In other words, these things have strength. In Act 3 of Macbeth, when the at first reluctant Macbeth to do anything unethical is a wanton murderer, and his wife, who put him up to all this, says, "What are you doing? You've gone off the rails." He responds, "Things bad begun make strong themselves by ill." Yes, that is why our sages, our method, our idiosyncratic Jewish method of being in touch with God was study. Diligent, ongoing study. And this was not just a nice thing to do in our tradition, it was one of the ways we worshiped God. And so this is something that it was believed that if one really immerses oneself in serious study of sacred texts, that we can make the world a better place. Now, I think we know that learning is a good thing, but we all know too from experience that learning in and of itself doesn't guarantee ethical and positive behavior. We have to make that decision. And so when Vicki and I are in Germany and we speak to high school kids, we say, okay, we understand that the Holocaust didn't just happen because a bunch of horrible people did horrible things. It was able to escalate to the extent that it did because lots of other people stood by and let it happen and didn't speak up. Yeah. So what does that mean to you in 2020, our young students? When you see, let's say, a student in school being bullied by another, you can do one of three things. You can join in and be popular. You can pretend, oh, that's not my problem, and walk away. Or you can say, this is wrong, stop it. And I hope that by the time we get that far in our lesson, the kids know which choice we are recommending to them, because that is the key, I think, to being the kind of person who is acting, if you will, in concert with God's will. There is so much about God. I said this before, that we don't understand, can't understand, will never understand. I accept that. But I also accept that I have some inkling of what God wants from me in terms of how I behave toward others. And if I try to follow that path, I think that that's the most that I can do, the most any of us can do. One of the great things, in my opinion, about the idea of deity that the Torah presents is what Skip referred to earlier, a God who is in partnership with human beings, a God who depends on us, trusts us to try to make the world better, a God, I believe, who weeps with us when we see some of the horrors that you described earlier. But the notion that God can be influenced by us, that God will listen to Abraham's argument against destroying Sodom and Gomorrah. The idea that God, who was furious with the people after they make a golden calf, is restrained by Moses and says, God, you can't destroy this people that you brought up out of Egypt. You got to give them another chance. Plus, you got to lighten up and you got to do things a little differently. God, you got to take my advice. Wow. To me, that's just amazing and wonderful. And the notion that there is a fluid back and forth, a real partnership. To be sure, we're the junior partners, but it's still a partnership.
It's a relational universe.
It's a remarkable thing.
Yeah.
It's a relational universe. We're in relation with God.
Yeah. And Dr. Young was very fond of quoting a biblical verse from the New Testament, which relates to the spirits that come up in all of us, which is what Christ said. The citation is 1 John 4:1, and it is examine the spirits, whether they be of God or not. And the idea is that one has to, in growing up, develop a strong enough ego so that you can make the decision between right and wrong, between what is good and what is evil. Anyway, everyone's awfully quiet here.
I'm looking up the verse.
It's the first letter of John 4:1.
Would you read it again, please, Skip? Because
I'm paraphrasing it off the top of my head, but it's examine the spirits whether they be of God or not.
I think that's a good barometer. Truthfully, yes, please.
I want to ask how you encourage your assembly about God will provide, about the providential God, especially in this time of COVID now. You know, I'm always talking to my people about God is here, God is with us, God is doing. How do you nurture hope and faith and resilience through your preaching? How do you share the immanence of God? Not only that, but also, as Francis said, the Ruach, the Spirit of God, breathing, inspiring us.
Thank you for that question. My immediate answer is sometimes not very effectively. This is a hard sell at this time. But for me personally, and what I try to, I'll use the term retail as a rabbi, the Torah, the Bible is my wholesale source. What I try to retail comes from Psalms, because the psalmist was very, very, very aware of the difficulties that life could often impose, difficulties of infirmity, difficulties of disease, difficulties of enemies, difficulties of people who speak evil against you. The litany of difficulties that life can offer us is fully on display in the Psalms. And what makes them endure? What makes them readable and something that we look to for inspiration is underlying it all, even with this awareness of the depths of depravity to which human beings can descend, the depths of sorrow through which a life can travel, that there is the idea that somehow, some way, God understands and is with us. And when I find myself becoming depressed or falling into despair because of things that might be going on around me, I find this comforting, and I do my best to share that sense of life having purpose and that hope always being there. You know, studies have shown that while there were many things that so many couldn't control, that one of the commonalities of those who emerged from the horror of the Shoah, was that they never gave up hope that things could be better. And I think that we must cling to that as we go forward. Now, to answer your direct question, I must repeat, sometimes, I'm not very effective at communicating that, because it is sometimes a difficult message for people to hear when they don't know where next month's rent is coming from, or they don't know if they're going to be able to feed their family. But I think that the fact that you can't always give a satisfactory message should not deter us from delivering the best message we can.
Steve, there's an interesting question from our Hindu participant, Kushbu Kantaria. Kushbu, are you there? Can you come on the screen? Maybe.
I have a question too.
All right, well, go ahead. This is Idris. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you for your contribution. I have a question. How much, according to the scriptures, God guides the believers through dream? Carlian gave a lot of importance to dream. In scripture, how dreams can be actually, how you can see whether the dream is coming from God and it's actual guidance. So the specific, how much guidance a believer can get from dreams, and a general question, what is the importance of dreams in Jewish religion?
Skip, could you just give me a summary? I'm having a little trouble hearing.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Steve. Steve has a bit of a hearing issue.
Okay.
So let me say it again. I think the question relates to what does the scripture say about interpreting dreams? And
does God help guide believers through dreams?
Does God guide us to dream, to actually dream?
Sometimes the answer is clearly yes. I don't know. I don't think everybody has this gift, but certainly some people do. Two scriptural examples. Jacob, when he leaves home and he leaves behind a record of hurt and anger that his deplorable behavior has inflicted on his brother, when he is at a point in his life where he has never given a thought to anything but his own selfish needs, he has a dream of angels going up and down a ladder or a staircase or a ramp or whatever. The Hebrew word sulam is not 100% clear, but the idea is clear. And Jacob awakes and says, my goodness, surely God is in this place, and I had no clue. I did not know it. He understands for the first time that there is something in his life more important than his own selfish needs. Of course, Joseph also had the gift of interpreting dreams, and he was able to use that gift to rise from the depths of the dungeon where he had been falsely cast on a trumped up sexual harassment charge, to become the second in command in all of Egypt and to save the entire country from the scourge of a 7-year famine. So yes, we see examples in the scripture of dreams and how useful they can be. Speaking for myself, I have to be very honest. I've had lots of dreams, and I only have the scantest clue of what they mean. I have not been given that gift. I fully realize that there are many, many talents and abilities which others have that I lack. And that's why I depend on others to set up my computer Zoom meetings, to balance my checkbook, to do 100 things that I can't do. And I think that as creatures created in God's image, we have to acknowledge that we are imperfect. So even though I can't interpret dreams, I like to read the writings of people who seem to have more insights into those things. I look at Jean Raffa's writings, for example, who Skip mentioned earlier. And most of the time, I can't fully understand how she gets from A to B to C, but I think it's quite remarkable, and I can be in admiration of that. So bottom line for me is that we all have to use the talents and abilities that we have in the best way that we can. And I do feel that dreams sometimes send important messages. I wish I were better adept at interpreting them.
Are there some dreams that's not from God, and does the scripture have some kind of guidance how to differentiate if a message is coming from God to guide your life or it's not godly?
I cannot think offhand of those occurrences in the Bible. I know that one of the accepted understandings of the origins of prophecy is a dream. In other words, one of the methods God communicates to prophets is through dreams. Maimonides in the 11th century articulated 5 different levels of communication, if you will, dreams being one of the more prominent. So prophets are judged in a very utilitarian way. If what they say comes true, they are considered to be receiving valid communication, but they're often challenged. And certainly in the time of what we call the pre-classical prophets, Elijah and Elisha, there were guilds of prophets, and they were often yes men for the monarch, basically telling the king whatever he wanted to hear. I think we have those kinds of advisors running around the world today, and it takes a degree of insight and inspiration to get beyond that. Today, for example, many largely recognized as a modern prophet is Martin Luther King. Streets named after him, schools, everything that you can imagine. Huge statue right up there with Abraham Lincoln and George Washington. I mean, you can't imagine more ex post facto adulation. But I'm old enough to remember when Martin Luther King was reviled by people on the left as being an Uncle Tom, not aggressive enough in pushing for civil rights, and maligned on the other side of the political spectrum for wanting to go too far, too fast. So prophecy, dreams, King spoke of his dream. And by that time, the world was just about starting to pay attention. But that preceded 8 years of being reviled, being stabbed, having his home bombed, as we know. So dreams and prophecy are a very, very complex thing.
Steve, Sandy Ansari, who's here, asked the question, can we hear a dream of yours? And I would say that's a loaded question. You don't have to feel that you have to give us a personal dream, but
well,
certainly.
No,
but
I have lots of dreams, and the message that I try to assimilate from these dreams is that what is really important is the difference that you can make in the life of one individual, and not the recognition that you might get in a more public way. As I said earlier, the story of Cain and Abel speaks to me because I understand the anger and jealousy of rejection. It is a difficult thing, and I think that Steinbeck's point that he makes in East of Eden is that rejection is the most difficult thing we deal with. And so if there is a message in my dreams, and I cannot articulate a scene, if you will, where this comes through, but when I wake up in the morning, I'm often telling myself to try to be as cognizant as I possibly can of the difference between what is real and enduring and what is fleeting and vain. What's fleeting and vain are ephemeral recognition, honors, getting your article published in some magazine. What's real is being able from time to time to be invited into the inner recesses of somebody's life and being able to be helpful to them in those situations. I don't know if that answers Sandy's question, but that's the best I can do. I hope it helps.
Thank you. Khushbu, do you want to ask your question here that you sent me privately, or I can read it, but
yeah, that would be nice.
okay, well, let me read what Khushbu said, and then maybe she can elaborate. She says, what I am unable to understand is what should we do when people like us are in the minority and my country is not fighting with other communities, but have become intolerant and hateful, what we all should be doing in our capacity. What should each individual do in our capacity? And just because of my interactions with Khushbu recently, I could add to this that as the coronavirus has emerged in India, there have been some fairly ugly scenes. For example, in her community, there are medical personnel who have been coming back from the hospital after a long day of fighting the coronavirus, and people started to attack them, at least verbally, for bringing the disease into their community. And so I guess the question really is, what are we to do if we're in the minority, as everyone in this discussion right now is in the minority, probably.
I would add one last thing in it. If I would have, what I see is a lot of people are being deprived of dignity, and yeah, I don't know.
Well, okay, so there's another aspect of this, which is that as the coronavirus caused India to shut down, many people who were day laborers started to walk home. And in some cases, they're walking across India. And at one point, there were 25 million of them. Maybe there are many more right now. And so she's observing the fact that those people are not being given dignity. And so I wonder if you have any comments about that.
My heart goes out to the question. My heart goes out to you who witnesses this. I must admit that as I sit in the comfort of our home in Sanibel, I am probably not fully capable of fathoming the depths of the indignity to which these people are subject. But the one thing I would say is nobody can take your dignity from you but you. And again, it goes back to the question of free will. It goes back to the story of Cain and Abel. Yes, you're in a tough position. Your offering has been rejected, whatever that offering is. But if you cling to hope that things can get better, that is the best chance you have that they will. Again, given what you are witnessing, this may seem trite and inconsequential, and I fully recognize that. But because it's not a good answer, it doesn't make it not the best answer I could offer. I wish I could do better.
Rabbi, just the thought that just flashed into mind. Cain and Abel. I mean, we can't alter the scriptures, can we? But in another scenario, if Cain had not given way to his sort of the feelings rising counter to Abel, but just gone to God and said, why have you accepted his and not mine? I'm so sad, I'm so upset. Go to God.
The rabbis ask these questions. They in their interpretive literature, they pose all kinds of questions. They even have Cain accusing God, saying, you're responsible because you didn't give me a better answer. And that's part of the mystery. You know, I think that as we come to what I imagine is the close of our session, I would say that the word Israel, the people Israel, it doesn't mean one who knows about God. It doesn't mean one who believes in God. It means one who struggles with God. And I think that if we engage in the struggle, no matter what the circumstances of our lives, no matter the indignities we see foisted on people around us, no matter the suffering, if we continue to struggle and cling to the hope, not necessarily the belief, that our life has meaning and purpose, and do what we can to make a difference.
So
I will tell you that just the other day, I had an impulse to phone the woman who had served as the rabbi of this congregation in 1991. And I didn't know her at all. I'd never met her. I just heard that she was there. But I saw a service that she led to dedicate our very special and precious Holocaust Memorial Torah. And I was very moved by that service. So I looked her up, picked up the phone. I don't like to call people on the phone, to be honest with you, out of the blue, but I picked up the phone. I called her and I said, I just want to tell you, I thought that was wonderful. I thought that was terrific. And I'm so proud to be the rabbi of the congregation that you served so magnificently. And I had no idea what was going on in her life, but it was very clear that that was something that made a difference to her at that moment. For whatever might be churning in her being. And when we see these opportunities, we have a choice. Once again, we can, I could have said, why should I call her? I'm busy, I got stuff to do, or seize them. And again, we may not be bringing about world peace by these individual gestures or curing cancer or all of the wonderful things we wish we could do, but not being able to do what we would like to be able to do shouldn't prevent us from doing what little we can do. And when we feel that voice inside of us telling us there is something that you can do, think of it as God's voice and use the talent, the ability, the opportunity that you have to try to make a difference to somebody.
Rabbi, can I just ask a question? Because, you're a rabbi. You're a rabbi. I'm not a rabbi in the Torah or anything like that. It seems to me, what you're saying is just so absolutely true, but it bounces off of a hardened heart. So how does a person harden their heart? So we need to guard against hardening our hearts.
Well, we have this stark example of the Pharaoh in Egypt, right? In Exodus. And we read 10 times in scripture about his hardened heart. The first time, the second time, the third, the fourth, and the fifth, it says Pharaoh hardened his heart. And then afterwards, it starts to say God hardened his heart. And then, of course, you have the horrible question, what kind of a God would do that to the poor man? But I refer back to the quotation from Macbeth, which I think is very salient here, that we have free will. And in the way the rabbis put it, at first, the inclination to do evil is as thin as a strand in a spider web. But when it is left unchecked, it can grow as strong as the rope that anchors a ship. And so I would say that we avoid hardening our hearts by listening to that voice that can speak to us and can accentuate the impulse for good. You know, the most dramatic of our prophets is Elijah. And yet he was not immune to despair. And so God, as a reward for all he had done, according to scripture, miraculously transports him to the source of Torah, to Sinai. And he is looking for inspiration. And we are told it comes not in a thunderclap, not in lightning, not in a whirlwind, but in, as the Hebrew goes, kol demamadaka, commonly translated as a still small voice or a soft murmuring sound. Now it is clear right from the story of Cain, we can shut off that voice. We can say, I don't want to hear it. Or we can say, I'm listening. Please tell me again. Encourage me.
So
training ourselves to listen for that
that's
voice.
Beautiful, thank you.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah. So Steve, there's one other comment that's here on the chat that I wanted to bring to your attention, and this is from Sandy. And Sandy, you can reveal yourself if you want to, but she says some philosophers say we don't have free will at all, and determinism is set in stone. And a parent asked Sam Harris, how do I tell my 5-year-old that there is no free will? And Sam said, don't tell him. This is what many people believe, so it's sad. Sam is also a non-practicing Jew, banality of evil.
So,
do you have any comment on that?
Sure. I did see a private note from Sandy, and I said, I just don't agree with those philosophers who say we have no free will. I think that my empirical experience shows me that I do, that my choices matter. And I know that because I've often made the wrong choice and have been about the business of trying to set it right. So I don't know how to really respond to somebody who says we don't have free will. I would say to the 5-year-old, if you make a choice to hit your sister, there will be consequences to that choice, and you have made the choice. And I would never accept that you were compelled by some force greater than your own 5-year-old mind that led you to pick up your hand and strike your sister. So I find that an idea that really is contrary to everything that I hold dear.
Yes.
The choices matter.
Well, yes, and even Sam Harris's comment about the 5-year-old, I found it was even the reaction and the response and the mother's question was Sam kind of negated himself, which is very interesting, in a way. To not tell the child is to give him more free will. And so, to tell him that if you were to tell him that there isn't free will, that there is free will, that he would, be able to have more of options in choosing, a good behavior versus a bad behavior. And it's almost like this something that like God would say to man, like, you do have free will, even though there's a lot of things already predetermined.
Correct.
So that we can be that 5-year-old that with that slither of choice that breaks into one reality, we can at the end of the day, get ourselves to a better place and feel that we have control over, our behaviors. for important reasons. So it's just really confusing because I mean, I listened to the research and it kind of like logically makes sense. But then I can tell that there is, you know, the mind does have the ability to choose, but yet, I mean, am I really choosing when my, you know, it all breaks down to the way my neurons are operating, and the way the environment is and the way I was raised and my actual endowed limitations. I mean, I go about my day making choices all day long and not being, you know, acting helpless. So clearly we all get up, we drink water, we do what we want to do. We make decisions. We believe that there's some free will. I just find it an interesting thing. And the fact that there's a rise in this atheistic, you know, Nietzsche says God is dead, you know, people are going to believe this, that, you know, their behaviors are not going to, you know, they don't have to be responsible for their behavior. So it's becoming a movement that, you know, determinism is determinism, and that's it. So we are in this culture right now where, you know, folks are talking about these issues.
It's a tough dilemma. You're absolutely right. And I think that I think engaging with these people to the extent that our patience, our time, our ability to put this in front of other things that we have to do is probably worth something. I think it's very important to tell people that choices matter and that our lives have purpose and meaning. As I say, underlying all of Torah, the underlying premise of the book is that life has purpose and meaning, and it only has purpose and meaning if our choices, on some level at least, make a difference.
Right. We also have to remember that there are consequences to our free will, both good and evil consequences. So, or good and bad consequences. So when we teach a child that they have free will, they have to understand that that free will can have consequences. It's not that you can pick what you jolly well want to do, like hit your sister, and not have consequences for that.
Absolutely, you hit your sister.
And I know that with like children, I work with children, so I see that the one thing that empowers them is the belief that they're making choices. No, mommy, I want berries, not apples. No, I want this toy, not that toy. I mean, they grow up feeling their identity emerge as they're making choices.
I agree with you. I think that's almost instinctive to think that your choices make a difference.
Yeah.
I have a question. I noticed that in circumstances where people are completely not able to act at all, in a situation where a person is either a victim or incapacitated or in a way stuck or just observing what others are doing to them, free will plays in a way that the person decides how to perceive it. So the way we think about things is also still a free will. Like even externally, perhaps we may not be able to alter things in the environment. Sometimes the environment we think about is very far away. Like right now I'm in Canada and India is far away, but just how we perceive it and what we think, even inside our mind, we have a free will.
Yeah. So I want to thank Steve. I want to give Tim one last chance to opine here, since he's my partner on this effort. And then Steve, if you don't mind, I'd ask for you to give us a benediction, and then we'll close with Kushbu's prayer for the world, if that's all right with you. So Tim, go ahead.
Well, thanks. I just on the tail end of the free will, I was about to say that yeah, without that, human life just becomes meaningless, and it's really sad that this becomes kind of an excuse, I think. I think of Flip Wilson, you know, oh, the devil made me do it. This is just so easy to say, well, we don't have free will, so it doesn't matter what I do or what anybody else does. This has been a really great discussion. I very much appreciate your perspective. You know, I come from a very Christian part of the world, and I feel like the Jewish tradition is our sister faith, but still I have a lot to learn about it, and so it's been really helpful to just hear your perspective, Rabbi. And I'm very delighted to hear you talk about the dialogue we need to have between the faiths. I think that is the wave of the future. We will survive to the degree that we can listen to each other and honor each other's experience and realize that we are all in this boat together. I'm just so I'm so grateful to hear about your perspective, and it makes me all the more interested to do a little more research in that area. So thank you again.
Thank you. I would conclude then, Skip, with 2 points. One, you know, we can never really understand what another person is living through unless we're living through it. As the rabbis would say, Al tishpot et amitecha ad shetavo limkomo, don't judge your fellow person until you've walked in her or his shoes. Or as the wall hanging that I could buy when I was driving across to Arizona and came to a Indian Native American shop said, don't judge your fellow brave until you've walked a mile in his moccasins. Again, there are these universal truths that are so very, very important, and that we each learn them in our own way, and that there is value in everybody's heritage. The other thing I would conclude with is a quick story. One of my favorites, it comes from the Talmud. It's about a king who imposed confiscatory taxes upon his subjects, and they complained. They came to the palace and they protested, and he got up on the basilica of his castle and said, I don't want to hear it. I need money to run my kingdom. That's not my problem, that's your problem. And the more they complained, the more he said that. Well, one day, an old man went to the town council and said, maybe I can have a talk with the king. And they said, what are you going to do? We've protested, we've done everything. And the old man said, well, I can't do any worse than you have, can I? And so they gave him permission to go approach the king. He knocks on the palace door. The king himself answers, said, what do you want? If you're here about the taxes, that's not my problem, that's your problem. I need money to run my kingdom, and if you don't have any, that's tough. And the man said, oh no, your majesty, I just wanted to invite you to come with me for a ride in my boat. Well, the king was completely taken aback by this request. It was a nice day, so he said, okay. They get out in the boat. And then at this point, when I tell the story with children, we all sing, row, row, row your boat into the middle of the stream. And when they get into the middle, the man picks up an hammer and an awl and begins to make a hole in the bottom of the boat. And the king says, stop, stop, I'm going to drown. And the man says, that's not my problem, your majesty, that's your problem. I'm just making the hole under my own seat. And what I think this coronavirus has taught me more than anything else is there's no such thing as a hole only under our own seat. We're all in this boat together, and we will either make it to the other side together or we will perish together. And of course, I hope, and I hold out that hope, and I pray that this will pass, and that despite the suffering that it's inflicting, we will come to the other side and continue the difficult quest of trying to make a more just, caring, compassionate society on earth. Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you, Steve. You brought to mind one story that I have to tell, which is that the old executive was pacing up and down in his bedroom because the following day was going to have to go bankrupt. And he was very troubled by the fact that he was going to have to tell his lifelong friend, the banker, that he was going to go bankrupt. And his wife was upset that he was walking up and down and she couldn't sleep. So when she heard that, she picked up the phone, called the friend and said, you know, Joe's going bankrupt tomorrow. And she hangs up and she says, now it's his problem and you can come to bed. So anyway.
Yep, thank you.
Would you give us a blessing, Steve?
I just did. Okay.
Yes, 2 hours worth, but can you
Okay.
give us a benediction then of some sort? Maybe you don't call it that, but
Eternal God, help us to listen. In Judaism, the central prayer is Shema, listen. May we all have the capacity to listen to one another and listen to the still small voice inside of us that is trying to tell us to do what is just and right. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Steve. So Kushbu, would you be prepared to also give us a blessing from the Hindu side of the world?
Sure. Do you want to start it and then I take it over?
Okay, well,
Are you up?
Kushbu has a mantra that means a prayer for happiness for everyone in the world and a prayer for all the worlds. And it contains just 4 words, 4 Sanskrit words, and a blessing. And I think that I would do it an injustice in this group if I start it. So I'm going to ask Kushbu to start it because she's much better at it than I am. And so.
All right. Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kushbu. And I hope that was meaningful to all.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you everyone for being here, and thank you again, Steve, for your participation here.
Thank you for having me, and thanks to all of you who joined in, and I'm so glad to see all of you, people that I know, new friends, and peace for all of us, please.
Yes. Thank you so much. I'll terminate the transmission at this point. Thank you again, Steve. I appreciate it very much.